All right, Jim, can we start? Is the Zoom good to go? Okay. Good morning. I am so happy to see all of you, and thank you for sitting close to us. My name is Lauren. I'm the Senior Director of Learning and Engagement here at Eastern State. And happy Constitution Day to all of you. I really want to thank our guest, who I'll introduce shortly. I want to thank everybody that's here with us in person, everybody that's tuning in online. Today, all day long through Sunday here at Eastern State, we're exploring the First Amendment, the powerful intersection specifically today around justice and journalism. And we're gonna dive deep into the personal connection that our guest Jy'Aire has to freedom of expression, which is what the First Amendment is all about in the Constitution. So often voices within the system are silenced, but today we are highlighting the strides of individuals like Jy'Aire in reclaiming the narrative. And so I want to tell you about my friend who sits here to my right. Jy'Aire Smith-Pennick is a writer, justice advocate, and self-proclaimed truth teller. Known for his writing in the Marshall Project, a nonprofit news organization focused on the U.S. criminal justice system, Jy'Aire has written about his experiences in prison and his journey of transformation through education and self-improvement. In addition to his experience with writing and advocacy, Jy'Aire is a certified peer support specialist focused on mental health, conflict resolution, and suicide prevention. We are so honored to have him join us for this chat. And we are excited to learn more about how media shapes public perception of justice and how those most impacted can reclaim the narrative. We will chat together for 45 minutes. We will open the floor to audience questions, both here in the room and online. So if you're tuning in online, feel free to drop anything in the chat that you want to ask Jy'Aire. And let's welcome Jy'Aire to the stage, guys.
Thank you.
So Jy'Aire, can you tell us how you came to journalism and what role writing has played in your life?
Absolutely. Well, as far as writing goes, I remember being just a boy and I wrote quite a bit. Not necessarily stories or anything like that, just kind of like journal entries, writing down how I was feeling because I was unable to process it at the time. It was a lot going on around me in my environment. And at that time, I didn't know how to really process trauma and or understand what trauma really was to begin with as a kid. You know what I mean? That's a big concept as a little kid. So I always had a composition book. But when I began to take writing serious, I was actually incarcerated. I think I might have had about 5 years in at the time. And I was at SCI Chester, and I was participating in, I think, my second Inside Out program at SCI Chester with Widener University. And it was led by Dr. Brenda Kucerka. And through my writings, she approached me and said, hey, you have a unique story and your style of writing speaks volumes, and I think it should be shared on a broader platform. And I said, what do you mean? And she suggested that I write for something called the Marshall Project, which I had heard of. I seen somebody who had written for them before on the news, but that was the extent of my knowledge of the Marshall Project. So it was a competition that was going on, and it was about 7 of us out of the Inside Out cohort that she suggested write something. And out of those 7 people, our pieces were then submitted to Akiba Solomon, which is the editor-in-chief of the Marshall Project up in New York City. And I found out about 2 weeks later from then Principal Spall at SCI Chester that my piece out of all 7 was the one that was selected. And that is how I began to take writing serious, and I got published through the Marshall Project. It was called A Blessing in Disguise. That was my first piece.
Has everybody here heard of the Marshall Project? Raise your hand if you've heard of it. Cool. So Jai, can you tell us like a little bit more about what the Marshall Project is and then like how things unfolded after that first piece was accepted?
Yes. So the Marshall Project, as you said, it's an online platform. It's an online publication. They also have, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a handout that actually goes around as well. But their main way of disseminating information is the online publication, and it goes around internationally. So you meet a lot of people, as I did, thankfully, and basically anyone who is impacted by the system. So you could be a judge, you could be someone incarcerated, you could be formerly incarcerated, as I am. You could have a brother or a sister or a child that's incarcerated. Anybody who's impacted, you are allowed to submit something to the Marshall Project, and if they like it, they will publish your article and then they will pay you, starting off at $100. The most I ever received was $200 for my latest piece, and that was quite a while ago, so I need to write something, but yeah.
So how many pieces have you published in Marshall Project so far?
And the Marshall Project specifically, just four.
That's great. So everybody here and everybody tuning in online, definitely look up Jy'Aire's articles on there after this talk. One of the things that's in your bio and one of the things that you say about yourself is that you're a truth teller.
Yes.
What does that mean to you, and how did you come to see yourself that way?
Well, when you're incarcerated, so just to backtrack a little bit, I had a 27-year sentence at the age of 18. Thankfully, I'm here with you all today. I'm 29, I'll be 30 on September 27th. This is the first birthday that I will be celebrating as a free man in a very long time, which I'm thankful for. But while I was incarcerated, I noticed that people around me, they would have things that they weren't comfortable with and they wanted to share or speak on or advocate for, but in doing so, you run the risk of retaliation. So oftentimes people just decide to not say anything or not do anything. And every so often you find someone who is courageous enough or bold enough to speak out, whether it be by filing a grievance or, publishing an article or what have you. And I made a choice early on that I wanted to be one of those individuals, because not everyone has the means or the courage or are in the position to advocate. So I felt like it was incumbent upon me to speak not just for myself, but for the people who felt like they didn't have a voice,
So one of the things that feels connected to that for me is vulnerability. And that's something that you've also written about. You mentioned that you've struggled with being vulnerable. What were some of the first steps that you took to overcome that fear?
Being honest with myself. Like over the years, I had to do a lot of looking inward. I had to do the work. And when you write these articles that are so personal, you have to acknowledge things that you may not necessarily like about yourself. You may have to delve into trauma that you didn't really know was there, and it was left unaddressed for all of these years because, as I said early on, you may not have been equipped with the skills to address it at the time or even to be able to identify it. So writing is a very personal process and it's very vulnerable, and you run the risk of being criticized by the public. But if you want to be truthful and authentic, then that's a risk that you have to be willing to take. And that was a risk that I was willing to take. But it wasn't always comfortable because, as we know, being vulnerable is very uncomfortable. Just for example, people do it all the time. But just as a man, right, a lot of times we project anger. But what people don't know is anger is a secondary emotion, often masking sadness. But when you're sad, what do you feel? Vulnerable. You feel exposed. When you're angry, you feel strong, you feel bold, you feel in control. When really you're just masking sadness. So we run from that vulnerability, and by writing, I had to not run from it, but face it.
That is just really resonating with me. That anger is a secondary emotion. And I'm just thinking through some of the other questions that we have been discussing, talking about up here. And it feels connected for me to reclaiming autonomy And that's something else that you've written about, that the system itself can rob people of autonomy. You put, quote, in one of your articles, in that process of the system robbing people of autonomy, it makes it harder for incarcerated people to adjust once they re-enter society. How does exercising your freedom of expression help you reclaim your sense of autonomy, whether you were writing for the Marshall Project inside or ways that you express yourself now?
Being incarcerated, it strips you of your autonomy. It reduces you to a number. So while I was in there, I was no longer Jy'Aire Smith-Pennick. I was 007 10200 when I was in Delaware, and then when I was transferred to the state of Pennsylvania, I was then ND 7319, and I was treated as such, right? So it takes a lot of resistance to not succumb to that. And I wasn't always successful, if I'm being honest. It's difficult, they dehumanize you, being stripped whenever they feel like it, and you have to, coming in your cell and just, rummaging through your belongings and taking what they feel as though is deemed contraband. So you don't really you have responsibility over yourself, but you don't. And when you re-enter society, that's very difficult because being in prison reduces you to a childlike state. At least that's been my experience. So did I mature over the years, the 11 years that I was incarcerated? Yes. I have a full beard. I didn't have a beard now. I had a head full of hair. I don't have hair now. I mean, I definitely matured, but I got smarter. But there is a lot of arrested development that occurred as well. Certain emotions are a little difficult to navigate. Like I just learned how to drive. I literally just got my license. And my friend Andrew that came with me today, I told him if we don't find a good spot, then you're going to have to parallel park because I still can't park. Like, I never learned how to drive because I came to prison so young. That's just something that I didn't get to accomplish prior to my incarceration. So, yeah, it strips you of autonomy. So I'm trying to regain that and learn how to navigate this space because it's all new to me.
Does writing still do that for you now? Like support you having autonomy, support you expressing yourself?
Although I haven't really written anything since I've been released, unfortunately, life moves very fast out here, so I see what people were talking about when my friends would go home and we would be on the phone and I'm telling them they should do this and do that. And they're like, man, it's very fast out here. Like, you don't understand. I understand now. So no, I have not written anything, but I can acknowledge that writing does definitely give you autonomy even out here because I wrote a little bit before I went in. And that's the one thing that people can control is the way I think. Or they can if I allow them to, but that's one thing I don't. While I was incarcerated, I knew that physically I was confined, but mentally I was free. And I learned how to run from the world by reading books and writing. And that's what liberated me.
Thanks, Jy'Aire. I want to turn to the idea of change and the idea of transformation, which are other things that you've written about. And the idea of change is something that the Marshall Project's particularly invested in. So what does the agent of change role look like to you? And what change are you hoping to create in the world?
I'm hoping to create a lot of change, right? Too much to name. But just to keep it on a personal level, I think one thing that's most important to me, even while I was incarcerated, I would meet individuals that were volunteers who would come into the prison. I was at SCI Chester, and you run into a lot of unique individuals that come through there. You meet politicians, a lot of professors, and things like that. And that was always special to me because I just wanted to be seen as a person and treated as such. So I would just talk to people and utilize that opportunity to try and establish a connection and learn as much as I possibly can. And I kind of got a little sidetracked, so.
No, that's all right. Just how do you see yourself as an agent of change
Okay,
now?
right.
But yeah, that's how we met, right?
Exactly.
And when this topic came up for Constitution Day at Eastern State, and we decided to look at journalism today, I was like, we have to get Jy'Aire.
Yeah.
So yeah, talk about like some of those connections that you made and how you're utilizing these resources to like create change in the world.
Well, I'm appreciative for you even considering me. But as far as me being an agent for change, I mentioned that in the Marshall Project, going back to establishing these connections while incarcerated and meeting new people. Not only was I meeting new people and going out of my way to do so because I just was eager for human connection, but also because I didn't want to be seen as just a number. I wanted people who had little to no interaction with the carceral system to realize that these walls were not only erected to keep individuals like myself confined, but also to keep individuals like all of you out. So you don't know what's going on behind these walls, so you don't uncover the potential that lies behind these walls. I'm not an anomaly. There's a lot of people like me. I met some of the best scholars in prison who would debate a professor under the table with ease. And I say that humbly, but it's the truth, and they'll even acknowledge it, right? But if you've never interacted with the carceral system and all you see is what's projected on TV, then it begins to socialize us into a certain way of thinking. And then when guys like me come home who actually have the intentions of doing the right thing and leading a positive lifestyle, it's harder to reintegrate into society because society that I so desperately would like to be a part of is now ostracizing me because there's a blemish on me, right? So then it's like for the weak, not the weak-minded individual, but for somebody who may not have the skills that I'm equipped with, that would be easier for them to return to their old ways, whether they wanted to or not, because they're like, well, I don't want to do this anymore. I worked on myself and I thought it would be good when I came home. And now I'm out here and I'm trying to be around these types of people to learn and continue to grow, but they don't want to accept me. So it's only room for me over here. What do I do? And then before you know it, the cycle just continues and they're back in prison.
So along those same lines, Jy'Aire, from your perspective, what are some of the most common or harmful misconceptions about prison, about incarceration, and how does writing, your writing or other writing that you've witnessed, help reclaim that narrative?
Okay, so I'll answer the first question first. I think one of the biggest misconceptions about prisons, or matter of fact, about prisoners, I don't like the word inmate, about prisoners or incarcerated individuals is that, you know, they're animals or they're irredeemable. They can't change. They're incorrigible, you know, things like that. And I understand people have done some not so great things. I get that. But people see an individual like me, and after getting to know me, they, you know, like they enjoy having me around. And I'm saying to myself, well, it's that elder that's serving a life sentence right now who went to prison for something not pleasant at all, who actually turned their life around and took me under their wing and gave me books to read and sat down and said, nah, youngin', you're doing that wrong. You shouldn't do that. Listen, and this is why. I understand you frustrated and you want to respond like this, but if you do so, where is that going to get you? Have you tried that before? Okay, so what about this? So had it not been for all of them, I wouldn't be here, right? I wouldn't be able to have this interview and sit in front of you all today. So I have to give credit to the people that are still left behind because they taught me a lot. As far as misconceptions about prisons, there's a big misconception, at least among some, that prisons rehabilitate. Now, I know that may sound strange coming from me because people are looking like, well, wait, I'm not saying that y'all think I'm great. I'm not tooting my own horn, but that's not what I'm saying.
You're pretty great.
But y'all may look at me and, well, you seem like you turned your life around. You're rehabilitated. It looks like it worked for you. Well, yeah, but no. Prison didn't change me. I changed me, right? I just want to clarify that because the narrative often gets turned into, oh, wow, look at Jy'Aire. Look at what he's doing. You know, prison worked. And they want to make me the poster boy for prisons. No, I had to fight tooth and nail for the things that I did while incarcerated. And SEI Chester is just unique within itself. They have more programs that are available to you. But the majority of prisons, if you had the amount of time that I had, you can't even participate in programs because they only want to let the people that have about 18 months left do programs because they are about to be back out. But if we're being honest, the ones that have that little bit of time are the ones that get in the most trouble, and the ones that have life sentences or 10, 15, 20, 30 years, those are the ones that are facilitating the programs behind these walls, teaching the guys that are about to go home. Like, we're the ones that are doing most of the things, but we're often excluded, right? So prisons, in my opinion, are not here to rehabilitate. They're here to punish us and to warehouse people, and it's about money. And that's just where I stand. So while it's great on the surface that I'm doing the right thing and I may be cheered for, it really doesn't behoove the system because I'm not going back. So that affects their bottom line. But unfortunately, there's millions more bids to be filled, and unfortunately, they probably will be filled to replace me, which is why I have to be the agent for change and try and combat that by sharing my story and showing all of you and everyone else that we're just real people. We're nephews, we're husbands, we're brothers, we have family, we care, we have emotions, we're empathetic, we get frustrated, we're people.
This is an unplanned question. What are some of those books that were recommended to you? Like, how can the public learn more about the truth?
So many books. A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. The autobiography of Malcolm X, I love. Some James Baldwin. Michelle Alexander, The New Jim Crow. Assata Shakur's memoir, that was very powerful. It's one that's slipping my mind right now. Are Prisons Obsolete?
Angela
Is that
Davis.
Angela Davis? Yes. Are Prisons Obsolete? That was a very powerful one. That's one of my favorites, just to name a few.
And when you think about, like, right, so we're talking about journalism today. Of course, there's a great book, so like writing of all kinds is welcome here. But in addition to the Marshall Project, like, what are other, where else can we find your writing or similar writing that's kind of reclaiming this narrative?
Where you can find it, I'm not sure if it's, I've done some writing for a publication in Germany, but I don't think it can be found online. It was sort of, just something that we did with the Widener workshop, and the professor, Dr. Andrea Zitlaw, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, over in Germany, she compiled a book and got it published, but I don't know where it can be purchased. I think it was just like our own personal project, but I do a lot of my own personal writing that hasn't been shared yet, at least not published.
All right. And you've done some radio appearances too, right?
Yes, prison radio.
That's another one to check out, Prison Radio. So what kinds of stories, whether through journalism or other forms of expression, do you think are most important to tell the story of reentry or to help spark a national conversation about criminal justice reform?
I think any type of storytelling and or writing can be useful, whether you do screenplays, journalism, investigative journalism, creative writing, poetry, rap, songwriting, anything. Like, it depends on your audience and what connects with them. We could both say the same thing, but I may write poetry and you, I don't know, are an opera singer, but we're saying the exact same thing, just in a different form. So I think that's what it takes, creativity, in order to reach different groups of individuals to convey the same message.
And you have also done theater, haven't you?
Oh, I have, yes. I participated in a theater class while I was at SEI Chester. So I graduated from Eastern University's prison education program. We were the first cohort. So I was able to earn my associate's degree through Eastern University's prison education program. And Dr. Flower came in to teach a theater course. She's the theater professor at Eastern University. And I'm actually going there in January because my tuition is paid to pursue my bachelor's. So I'll be living on campus come January.
Congratulations. That's pretty epic. Give it up for Jy'Aire. Come on. I just have one more question for you, and then we're going to turn it to the audience.
What's
And it's the thing that we talked about when you got here today, right? So we heard that you write journalistic articles for all kinds of outlets. You've been on the radio, you've done theater. But I learned this morning that you're also a poet.
Correct.
So did you want to share a spoken word piece for us before we turn it to questions?
Sure. So the one that's coming to mind is a piece titled Prayers of a Savage. I remember getting sentenced, and the judge was, the judge along with the prosecutor was just calling me a savage and all of these demeaning things, which quite frankly, it didn't really resonate at the time because I was young and I had like a non-caring attitude. But, he was telling me that I'm going to die by the age of like 25 in the streets, or I'll be doing life in prison, things like that. And a few years later, I thought about that experience, and I wrote a piece called Prayers of a Savage. And it's kind of like an open letter to God or your higher power or whoever that is. I personally I'm not a religious person, but I use the word God. So let's see. God, what are these sins that I have tried to leave behind me? The 4 felonies on my record, the broken homes due to my actions, the 13 wax baggies filled with heroin wrapped in plastic stamped night night, from one palm to another, from my palm to a mother's, the Glocks with 30s, the perk 30s that make my whole body numb by the 30th minute. I'm counting down the seconds. 3, 2, 1. Damn, I'm on. The cruelty of addiction, the cruelty of resentment, the constant confliction of emotions. I love you, I hate you. And don't you dare point out that oxymoron. These are my feelings and only mine. What are these on a scale of sinner failure, that they should follow me to social gatherings, where I'm constantly given the side eye? And if body language could be verbalized out here, who the hell invited that guy? What are these that they should find me in prison at the age of 18, serving a 27-year sentence, partially due to propaganda that's inaccurate? The prosecutor was so passionate while painting pictures of these quote unquote savages that I hang with. What was I thinking, God? So absent-minded at the time, oblivious to the puppeteer behind me, controlling my every move while weed smoke clouded my thoughts and gunfire blinded my sight momentarily. But when the smoke clears, still I see bullet-riddled streets, blood stains from the deceased, yellow tape conveying caution, abandoned row homes, vandalized, graffiti with RIPs. Somewhere behind me, there's a shoebox full of memories, a Gucci bag full of regrets and respect from all the wrong people. My case was tragic, so they labeled me savage. Am I salvageable, God? Amen.
Amen, Jai. Jy'Aire, what an honor to be in conversation with you this morning. Thank you for sharing so much of yourself with us. And I want to turn it over to the audience. If you have any questions, we're happy to take them. My colleague Kit will text me anything that's come through online, and I will bring the microphone to you. So who has a question for us? All right, Andrew.
Jy'Aire, your being here today really challenges my perception of someone who's been incarcerated. You seem like a very positive role model for someone who's wanting to turn their lives around. So you had mentioned about prison doesn't reform people, that you reform yourself. Prisoners will reform themselves. At what point, and what was the incentive for you to, like at what point did you realize that you wanted to turn your life around and get out of Delaware and move to Pennsylvania, where you had opportunities to be where you are today?
Thank you. So, long story short, a riot happened in Delaware, and they ended up transferring a lot of Delaware prisoners to Pennsylvania back in 2017, which is how I ended up at Camp Hill for 30 days. And then after classification, I landed at SCI Chester, where I did the remainder of my sentence before I got my sentence commuted by the Delaware governor, right? First, I had to get sick and tired because unfortunately, this wasn't my first rodeo. So I just did 11 years, but prior to that, I had been incarcerated twice as a juvenile. I would come home for 6 months and go right back, come home for 6 months, go right back, right? But I didn't learn yet. Like, I didn't want to change. That's the first thing. You have to want to change. A lot of us know someone who's struggling with addiction. You can put them in rehab 1,000,000 times. They're going to come home and do what they want to do. They have to really get sick and tired of being sick and tired, and they're going to seek the help when they're ready to seek the help. You can't force a person to do it. You can be there as a guide, but when they're ready to receive it, they will. So that was first. I got tired. Second, environment is important, right? I always say environment can, not environment, but exposure can cement perspectives, or it can shift perspectives. My perspective was cemented at one point, but when I got moved to SCI Chester and I participated in my first Inside Out course with Swarthmore, with Professor Keith Reeves and Dr. Ben Berger, that's what opened my eyes. I was 22 years old at the time, and I was sitting across from students who were 18, 19, 20, because for those of you who aren't familiar with Inside Out, the students sign up for a class, but instead of doing it on campus, they come into the prison. We're the inside students, they're the outside, and we go through a semester. I felt ashamed that they were my age and much smarter than me and going on to do something with their lives. And I was sitting in prison with a 27-year sentence, and I couldn't even keep up with the conversation. I didn't even know what capitalism meant, right? And I live in a capitalistic society. And at one point I was a drug dealer, so I'm indulging in capitalism, or engaging in it rather, but I didn't even know what the concept meant. And I felt small. And then I met people who are very educated, who look like me and talk like me, that were also incarcerated. They could talk the way we talk in private, but then they can get in front of these classrooms and they could talk about ancient Greek mythology, African civilization, criminology, whatever. They could even speak different languages, some of them. And that made me really want to change. So that's when the flame for the streets got doused and the flame for education and change got ignited.
So we did get a question come through online. Jy'Aire, thank you for speaking today. My name is Brittany. I work in schools. Would you be open to speaking in classrooms at all?
Absolutely. I'm always willing to give back to the youth because they're our future. And I wish I had more people that were willing to talk to me. And I also wish I was in a mind frame back then to receive the lessons or the knowledge. So yes, Brittany, I will be willing to speak.
All right, and we can make that connection, Brittany. If you're tuning in, we can connect you to Jy'Aire. Other questions from our audience here in the room? All right, Michaela.
Hi.
Hello.
Happy early birthday. So I noted you mentioned that you're very busy right now and you haven't been doing a lot of writing for publication, but I'm curious, as you approach getting your bachelor's and as you kind of, as you move forward, where do you see writing kind of within that, and what do you hope to, is there anything you really want to write and publish, like a certain topic or anything, or where do you kind of see writing fitting into your future?
Thank you for your question. I definitely would like to get back to writing because it helps me process my thoughts. I'm just trying to get settled into this new life. It can be very overwhelming, but writing is important to me. It's always been a part of me. Whether it comes out in a different form, that's another conversation, but writing is writing and it's important. So I think once I get back in school, come January, I'll get back into the flow of writing and getting used to it. Because it seems like that's when I did the most of my writing, when I was in school, because it was a habit. You know, I've gotten away from it recently because trying to get my license and things like that, but I'm going to write. I would love to write a book. A lot of people have asked me to write a book. I have a very unique story. Just to be brief, CNN did a story on me. The mother of the victim in my case actually spoke on my behalf. She's become a mother to me. I could literally call her right now, "Hey, Mom," and she, "What's up, son?" She's actually watching live while she's at work. see an end of the story on us, and we got invited to the Tamron Hall show this fall. So I'm waiting on a producer to call back. So I definitely would like to write a book because I think I have a lot to say, a lot to share, and it could help a lot of people. But I also want to continue my advocacy work and just share stories. My biggest thing is just, shifting the narrative and just letting people know that whether it's a man or a woman, like, we're real people. We did something that we aren't proud of, but people change, So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but.
I would read that book. I think a lot of people here would. So a lot of love coming through online, just people saying, continue to share your God-given talents, great example for motivation. And then another question that's come through. Thank you, Jy'Aire. Tina just wrote, I'm so proud of you, by the way. What's up, Tina?
Love you, Mom.
Thank you for sharing your story and gifts. What advice would you give those that are working in institutions, so in prisons and jails? And in this question, you've also been invited, and there's a question, would you be open to talking to young people incarcerated in our city jails and the education programs at the Philadelphia Department of Prisons? So what advice do you have to people who are working inside, and would you ever speak to young people who are currently incarcerated?
As I said, when Brittany had asked me about coming into schools, my position stands. I would definitely come in to the juvenile facilities or the city jails to speak to the younger people because I can relate. Like, I know what it's like to be in that mind frame. I know what it's like to not care. I know what it's like to think, when I walk out this door this morning,